to him and drawing close to him is the treatise of Allamat al-Dunya. That's his epithet, that's his nickname, which literally means the greatest scholar in the world. Imam al-Rahman bin Abdullah Balfaqih, titled Opening the Insight of Our Brethren. And so, but if you see the English translation on the front here, it says the spheres of Islam, Iman, Ihsan, and Irfan. And that's one of the ways that it's known, but that's actually the subtitle. And the main title is Fathu Basair al-Ikhwan, which literally means that opening the inner sight of our brothers. Right, so that you don't title a book in any way other than what you essentially want that book to do. So the whole purpose of this book is fath, which is the idea of opening. Fataha yaftahu, fathan is to open. And then you have the word basair, which is the plural of basira. And that the word basar in Arabic is for your physical sight. And the word basira is for your inner sight. And so that this book is written to open the inner sight of the ikhwan. And that in no political sense, Omar looked up real quickly, we're not talking about the ikhwan in Egypt, right? Or any type of ideology or anything like that. I'm just kidding with you, Sayyidi Omar. But nowadays you even say the word ikhwan, or you even say the word Hizballah. People all of a sudden think of these names and have political affiliations. But the Hizballah, we all want to be from Hizballah. Don't quote that. I know this is being live streamed and people take these snippets. Allah inna Hizballahi. Allah Ta'ala speaks about, right, the people of Allah, the party of Allah. This is what we all want to be from, but in the correct way, in a way that is beloved to Allah and the Messenger of Allah. Anyhow, that the ikhwan here means his brethren, his brothers. And so he essentially wrote this for his brothers in the spiritual path. And this is the beauty, is that we're all in reality brothers and sisters in many ways, in very real ways. Even though we have different mothers and fathers, is that we're all brothers and sisters in humanity. Every single one of us has a common ancestor in a very real way. And we all know that. But then there's a special type of brotherhood that comes from those who enter into Islam. And that everyone that who believes the same as you, they're your brother. And from the blessing of Allah, still to this day, this is intact. Why is it that Muslims that tend to send salams to each other, wherever they might see each other, in airports, all over the world, people you know, people you don't know, they see a Muslim, salam alaikum. And this is a blessing from Allah Ta'ala, and this is something that brings great joy to the heart. And then you have that in the most specific sense, so you have brothers and sisters in humanity, brothers and sisters in faith, and then you have brothers and sisters in the spiritual path. And so that when you have fellow brothers and fellow sisters that are taking the spiritual path seriously, and this might or might mean that you actually have the same tariqah or spiritual path. You could have a different spiritual path. That's not what it's about. What it means is that you are concerned about drawing near to Allah. And anyone who has that same concern, they're your brother or they're your sister. And that we have to look out for them in that way spiritually, the way that we would look out for our actual brothers and sisters, and so forth. And so, that this is why he wrote this book. And as we will see, it has other titles as well. And so one of the things that let's all stop and just do right now is to make strong intentions. Is that nothing is preventing us from having this happen to us, from reading this book. Allah is qadir ala kulli shay. Our teachers would always say, as-saqi baqi. The one who spiritually irrigated the people who came before remains, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is everlasting. He's al-Hayy al-Qayyum. He can give to whomever He wants whatever He wants, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so let's all make a strong intention from the blessing of exposing ourselves to these sacred meanings, is that this is what happens, is that there's a fath at the level of the basira, and that we have tahaqquq and realization of Iman and of Islam and of Ihsan. And then He includes this fourth sphere, which is one of Irfan, which is knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the subtitle then is, it is a sharh, an explanation of the dawa'ir. So the word dawa'ir, dara yaduru, is to circulate, it's to go in a circle, and a da'ira is a circle. And it could actually be a circle that you like draw on the ground, like a circle, or it could be that used metaphorically. So you say that that person's in my da'ira, like they're in my inner circle. We even say that in English, they're in my inner circle. They're in my inner group. And is that the prophets have their dawa'ir, the awliya and the salihin have their dawa'ir. And this is where we want to be. We want to be with the righteous, and that we want to be with them, and we want to be close to them. But the word da'ira here has been rendered sphere. And so one of the ways of looking at it is that you could refer to it as like concentric circles. Okay? And really what it is, though, it's three-dimensional. When you speak about Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, it's three-dimensional, not just two-dimensional. In order to that really fully be a believer, is that you have to have all of these different elements, or you'll be incomplete, you'll be flat. You'll either be one or two dimensions only. What we want is all three. And that another way of looking at it, if we think of them as concentric circles, is that each one gets deeper and deeper. And so that this is why that some of them say, when they refer to the heart, and then the ruh, and then the sir, that three terms that relate to our inner being. The heart, of course, is the qalb, the ruh, of course, is the spirit, and the sir is the innermost secret. But some of them refer to it like layers, almost like peeling, like that layers that you peel off and it gets deeper. So you have like the outer husk, and then you have like the outer shell, and then you have like the kernel or the nut, and then you have, if you press that nut, that you get oil, like different, or you could think of it as like peeling an onion, that you take off a layer and then there's another layer, and you take off that layer and then there's another layer, and so forth. And so that it's different degrees of that layers of our innermost being. So this is that why he wrote this was for this purpose. Is it so that you and I can actualize our Iman, our Islam, our Ihsan, and then start to experience Irfan. Now, before we actually get into the work, I wanted to just speak a little bit about Habib al-Rahman bin Abdullah Balfaqih. He was one of the great Imams of Islam, and he's not very well known outside of the Arabian Peninsula, but within the Arabian Peninsula he's very well known. And that he is of prophetic lineage. So for those of you that have the book, that you can see, he lists his lineage there. And every single one of his fathers, back to the Prophet ﷺ, was not only from Ahl Bayt, obviously that's his lineage, but they were all scholars and they were all awliya. Every single one of them. Right? Back to Rasulullah. And you have in his story this beautiful glimpse into traditional society, and that tells us a little bit about how people used to live and what it is that they used to deem to be important. And I personally believe that these glimpses into traditional society, in terms of when we read stories of the righteous, but also when we visit the remnants of these beautiful traditional societies in the Muslim world, which are still there. They're still there to this day. And for those of us that were just blessed to go to Morocco, you see the vestiges in Fez, that you see the traces that are left of these great people and what it is that they did and what they left behind. And I always remember one of the very amazing things about being with traditional scholars and sitting before them and being in these traditional environments is that everything is crystal clear. Everything is clear. You know exactly what life is about. There's no ambiguity. You know exactly what you have to do in the beginning of the day to the end of the day. You know what you have to do at various stages of your life. And that I always used to wonder why sometimes they were a little bit strict on some people that kind of started going astray. And it just became clear to me that it's very different, like in our society where so many people are confused. There's actually a lot of people that want to be religious, but they just don't know how. It's very different. But there, everybody knows. And increasingly they're getting confused too. But in general, people know. You're either following the straight path or you're not. There's not a lot of ambiguity. People know exactly what it is that you have to do to be good, and then some people choose not to do it, and they're bad. End of story. There's very few people in between. You're either like this or you're like that. I'm generalizing, but that was very much my experience, not just in Mauritania, but also in Tarim and in other places. So, Habib Abd bin Abdullah, his family name is Balfaqih, one of the famous families of the Sada Ba'alawi, that go back to the son of al-Faqih al-Muqaddam, whose name is Ahmad. Sayyidina al-Faqih al-Muqaddam, Muhammad bin Ali Ba'alawi, the greatest Imam of the Ba'alawi way. He was born in the year 574 and passed in the year 653. And he had 5 sons. And that one of them, whose name is Ahmad, his name is Ahmad al-Shaheed, is that he used to ask Allah all the time to die shaheed. That was his goal in life, was to die shaheed. And one time that there was a very heavy rain and a flash flood came and it swept him away, and he actually drowned. And he's buried about 25 minutes outside of Tarim, because the flash flood took him all the way to this city called Qasam. And to this day that he's buried there. And there's other families like the Jifri family. They go back to Ahmad ibn al-Faqih al-Muqaddam and a number of others. So his family at Balfaqih, that they are especially known for knowledge, especially in the later period, is that they had a lot of ulama that among them. And so he was born in the year 1089 of the Hijrah. Okay, so that's 1678. So it's always funny in my mind when you think about that, like how he's actually considered to be from the muta'akhirin, like from the later scholars. Whereas if you think about in our society, what was happening in the United States of America in 1678? Right, that was a long, like what was happening here? Yes, that you had some colonies, but this was 100 years roughly before the United States even became a country. And that he's doing the same thing that his ancestors were doing for centuries. So he was born in Tarim, in the Hadramaut Valley. And that, as was customary, is that the first thing that he did when he learned how to read and write was to memorize the Quran. And that this really is considered to be almost like, it's not, but it's almost like a prerequisite of any true scholar, is that they memorize the Book of Allah. Because that's where it begins and that's where it ends. In the end, you always come back to the Quran. And one of the famous statements of Imam al-Haddad is that he said, a murid, an aspirant, someone who's seeking closeness to Allah, is not called a murid. They're not really seeking closeness to Allah until they find in the Quran kullu ma yurid, everything that he wants, everything that he needs, everything that he's seeking. That ultimately, everything that we need is in the Book of Allah. Everything is there. Everything is in the Book of Allah. And then that the Sunnah of our Prophet expounds what is in the Quran, and then the scholars expound what is in the Sunnah of our Prophet. And so there's various degrees then, but ultimately it all gets back to the Quran. Everything gets back to the Quran. All ulum get back to the Quran. And it is for this reason is that they say that it is the akmalu wird, the most perfect litany of the greatest of the awliya is the word of the Quran. It's the greatest word of all. And you could also say in addition the 5 daily prayers. The 5 daily prayers are a wird. It's something you have to do day in and day out. And that's more in terms of what Allah Ta'ala has prescribed. And even Ramadan is a wird. It's something we do on a yearly basis. But the Quran, reading the Quran is the greatest wird of all. And it's not always easy for us though to fully approach it though in that way. There's a lot that you have to do in order to understand Allah's book. And there are a lot of tools that you have to acquire to understand Allah Ta'ala's book. And yes, that doesn't mean that you don't still recite the Quran devotionally. You do, even while you're trying to acquire those tools, and it will have an impact upon you. But this is what he did. And so he said after this, as it is set about mastering the basic Islamic sciences. And that he spent 10 years constantly keeping the company of and learning from his father, who was a great scholar, Habib Abd bin Ahmed. And that this is the way that they used to do it, is that their very first teachers were their parents. It was their mother and it was their father. Is that this is where deen begins. This is where the training begins. Is that if we wait for someone else to teach our children, is that who's going to teach our children if we're not teaching our children at home? Both mother and father alike, the number one duty upon their shoulders is not just providing food and drink and clothing for them and shelter. The duty that takes precedence over that is helping them arrive to the hereafter safely. That is the number one duty. And everything else is important, although it's secondary in relation to that. And sometimes we get our priorities mixed up. We get overly concerned about their worldly lives, and that we should be concerned about our worldly lives insofar as it relates to their hereafter. So I'm not saying that you don't have a career. I'm not saying that you don't develop a trade or learn a craft. I'm not saying that you don't go to school. But how are we training the upcoming generation to look at that? What is their intention in doing so? Is that if we look at it solely from a worldly perspective, there's a whole bunch of ideas out there, the vast majority of which will take them astray and will lead them to make bad decisions. But we want to ingrain in them from an early age how to approach life and what it really is all about, and then to help channel them in the direction that is best for them. And we don't want to put unnecessary pressure on them when that might not be their path, nor do we want to unnecessarily leave them unmotivated. It's a balance, and each child is different. And we have to tailor our approach to each child and figure out what is best for them. But this is the way these people were. 10 years that he spent studying with his own father. And that again, part of what we're covering in the Sisters Halaqah, is this idea of traditional principles for raising children in the modern world. And it's difficult because so many things get turned upside down. And what was previously an exception, that exception has now become the norm. And you have to readjust based upon the societies in which we live. And that oftentimes we find ourselves trying to prevent greater harm from coming than actually really building solid foundations. And I think that this is why we have such a beautiful opportunity here, living together in a community where we really have an opportunity, I really believe this, to build strong foundations in our children. So they're not just always trying to stay above water. No, they're adept swimmers. And they know how to that deal with the challenges of the time in which we live. And one of the most important things that they need to do that is deep spirituality, where they have strong Iman and they have a holistic perspective on life. So nothing for them is outside of the scope of the religion. And their approach to the deen is vast enough that anything that they do in life is that they've already been trained how to conceive of that thing, how to approach that thing. And this is possible, but it takes time. And so, he says that his father commanded him to take his place teaching and giving fatwa before the age of 20. What do we do with our childhood? Ya Latif. We end up studying texts that we should have studied when we were young. And it's humbling. Knowledge is humbling. I remember, my goodness, the first time I went to Mauritania and I was trying to speak Arabic. I didn't know that many words. These young kids thought it was so hilarious. Right? They say this, and I'd pronounce it wrong. And then they all laugh and make fun of me the way that I said it. And then it's yani akada. Right? And I remember that that first summer, I was within a year of conversion, and I spent some time in Mauritania, and then Mustafa Davis and I went on this journey after that. My God, I think we might have set a Guinness Book World Records in terms of types of transportation that we used. Anyhow, we arrived to Granada, Spain, and we're staying with Shaykh al-Rahman, the son of Murabat al-Hajj rahimahullah, and that Dr. Omar many years ago had spent time in Granada. And they had this tape of Dr. Omar that was that time maybe 15, 20 years old. And it's Dr. Omar that's saying the alphabet and walking through the letters and how to pronounce all the harakat, the diacritics on the letters. And of course, Dr. Omar, there's actually a video online, I don't know if you've seen it, where he's at the Maliki Fiqh conference. And Dr. Omar, mashallah, was, his Arabic was impeccable way back in the day. And they used to mention about Dr. Omar is that when he was learning Arabic, he refused to speak to anyone in English. He would speak to them in Arabic, khalas. He refused. And then look at his knowledge of the Arabic language. And to speak it in that way, even he's one of the few Ajamis that Arabs actually really think is Arab. Most Arabs, no matter how much we sit and try to learn Arabic, he's an Ajami. All it takes is just one word or one expression, khalas. You can tell he's an Ajami. He's a non-Arab. And he was just going through the alphabet. Alif, and then Ba, B, Bu, Ib. And then I remember just sitting there having to you have to force yourself to just figure out how to pronounce these letters that are so foreign to English speakers. Anyhow, that they thought it was kind of funny, and this is why they say is that in order to ever be a student of knowledge, the word in Arabic is tajarra, which is if you have a nasty medicine that your mother is making you drink, right? Like your probiotics or whatever at home, that you have to just force yourself to swallow it, even though you don't want to. And that you have to do that. If you don't do that with learning, that you always remain ignorant. Is that you have to force yourself to swallow the pill of humility and just humiliate yourself. And they asked Ibn Abbas, is that how did you attain everything it is that you attained? And he said that I lowered myself as a student. ظللت طالبا فعززت that مطلوبا. Is that I lowered myself as a student, and then I was put in a position where people needed to ask me questions. And that there's nothing dishonorable about lowering yourself and saying, I don't know, and I'm going to learn. That's exactly what we have to do. So, that he also kept the company of his maternal grandfather, a Habib by the name of Habib Muhammad bin Abd al-Idrus. And incidentally, for those this word Habib, what does it mean? It's a technical term that essentially means a scholar or pious person from Ahl Bayt. And even in the Ba'ali tradition, it was only used from the time of Imam al-Haddad into the present day. So it's only really been used for the past 300 years. And then in the period before that, roughly from the time of Sayyidina Faqih Muqaddam into that of Imam al-Haddad, they used to use the word Shaykh. So that's why you have like Shaykh Abd-Rahman al-Siqaf, Shaykh Abu Bakr bin Sadim, they would use the word Shaykh. And then before that, from the time of Imam al-Muhajir, they tended to use the word Imam because of their great stature in the religion. So he spent time learning from his maternal grandfather and his maternal uncle. Both were ulama. So you can imagine if you grew up in that environment where everybody around you, right, is learning. And this is why that if we could create that here, even snippets of that, where this is just what people do. They spend time learning. This is what people do at Asr at this time. This is what people do on their weekends. Yes, you can still take vacations and these other types of things, but if we establish that type of culture where that just becomes what it is what you do, I could swear an oath by Allah that what you will get from that is so much greater than what you think that you're getting by doing those other things, is that you will completely belittle those other things in your mind compared to the sweetness of learning once you taste the sweetness. But the problem is when you taste the sweetness of learning, it's difficult then. Especially when you get pulled into admin things. But never mind, we won't go there. He also stayed at the hands of his brother Habib Muhammad and Habib Ahmed bin Umar al-Hindawan. And he spent a number of years receiving knowledge from Imam Abdullah bin Alawi al-Haddad. So we know Imam al-Haddad was born in the year 1044 and passes in the year 1132. Okay, so he was born in the year 1089. So he was born 45 years after Imam al-Haddad, roughly, and he dies 30 years after him. So Imam al-Haddad was significantly older than him, but he was one of his primary teachers. And that he raised him and he trained him. And that he said about this time that he spent with Imam al-Haddad, I read numerous books to him and benefited from him greatly. He had special concern for me and pure love for me. Now just imagine what that would have been like to have spent time with someone like Imam al-Haddad, and to have studied with him, and to have learned from him, and to have been in his presence. You can see why these people why they attained what it is that they attained. He says that Habib Abd would carry an umbrella for Imam al-Haddad to shade him from the sun on his visits to the Prophet Hud, alayhi salam. Imam al-Haddad thought very highly of him. He once sent some very difficult legal questions, and when he saw Habib Abd answers to them, he named him Allamat al-Dunya. So Imam al-Haddad is that like Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, who that they said is that he had the Bahr of Sharia on his right and the Bahr of Haqiqah on his left, and that he would dip into whatever ocean of knowledge that he'd want at each time. What he needs from the Bahr, the ocean of the Sharia, what he needs from the ocean of the Haqiqah. And some of them say that Imam Haddad was a Mujtahid Mutlaq, Allahu Ta'ala. But despite that, he's 30 years older than Habib Abd and he directs fit questions to him. This is the way these people were. They had no nufus. They had no nufus. It wasn't, I'm the senior scholar here. They didn't look at it like that. Right? In fact, that if there was someone that could suffice them, it was a huge burden off their shoulder. They would push people to other people if that they know those people were qualified to deal with them. And this is the way the true people of Allah are. And I remember one of my teachers, Shaykh Umar bin Hussein al-Khatib, may Allah preserve him, a great faqih and very spiritually gifted person. And that he said the word fahal in the Arabic language is like that. They speak of it like in terms of goats, like the prize goat that helps the flock. Anyhow, the fahal, like the greatest scholar, as he says, is the one who wants his students to surpass him. He said, you're not a true scholar if you want your students to remain where you're at. Is that rather the scholars try to, in the quickest way possible, to get people up to where they're at so then they can go further. Because they want them to go way beyond what is that they've attained. And that's totally possible because you can, through proper instruction, summarize the path for people so that they can move very quickly. And this is why you have a lot of books that do that. And that this is this is how they view this. So he sends these people with very difficult legal questions, and Habib Abd, without even looking at a book, answers them, writes his answers, and then when Imam al-Haddad read the answers, he says, "Wallah, ma fil akwan mithl Abd." He said, "By Allah, there's no one in the cosmos like Abd," meaning that this is one of the greatest scholars of our time. So who can answer questions like that? And Habib Abd bin Abdullah was known to be very simple. He was a farmer. In addition to his scholarly activities, he actually spent time farming. He would cultivate the earth, and not just garden like we go out every once in a while and garden. No, he was a farmer, where he would actually spend time on the farm, that cultivating crops, harvesting them. And there's this beautiful story where that there was these group of people who came to the people of Tarim to ask them a few questions. And they were in a place near the grave of Imam Abdurrahman Baj al-Haban, just outside of Tarim. And that he was sent to go speak to these people and answer their questions. And he had been farming that day, so when he went to them, he had his shovel, and he had his shovel and the instrument that he was using to farm. And he came in farm clothes. But he's been on the farm. He's dirty. You can imagine what he would have looked like. And that he walks up to them, and they say, "Who are you?" Right? He mentioned his name, and he says that, "I'm here to help answer your questions." So they present the questions to him. Without looking at a book, he just mentions the answers. And they're like, how could it? They thought he was a khadim, right? They thought he was just someone who was like serving around the house. And they said, if this is like the khuddam, this is what the servants in Tarim look like. He says, what they're about, the scholars. But he was very humble. He used to draw the water from the well, right, by himself. And if you've ever seen in a traditional society, usually only servants do that. Like in Mauritania, there was only certain people who would draw the water out of the wells. But at times you would find these very humble scholars who would go and do these types of things because they wanted to serve themselves and they wanted to break their souls. And they did not want their nafs to get the best of them. And he also traveled to different places in Yemen. He was known to have visited the scholars in Zabid, and he also he came to know many of the ulama in the Haramain, in the blessed cities of Mecca and Medina, and it was there that he connected to the vast majority of other spiritual paths by way of tabarruk, which is the way of the awliya and the salihin. They like to have connections in different chains of narration back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And many of his works are still here with us, and hopefully more of them will enter into English. I have a compilation of a 2-volume work that includes many of his other treatises and books that he wrote. And one of his more famous works are lines of poetry called the Rashafat. And they're some of the most beautiful lines of poetry in existence. They're just incredibly beautiful. And it's almost as if like he can write in rhyme the way that he can write in just prose. Right? It's just it's almost as if he has such a command of the Arabic language, is that the same thing that he can do in prose, he can do in poetry. And there's a lot of different, and they're recited in a very specific way, but there's a lot of blessings. And this book's actually been published in Arabic, and has a commentary by Shaykh Abdullah bin Ahmed Basudan. And then one other last story about his life. There was a time during his time that there was a ruler who put him in prison for a particular reason, and that they put him in a barrel. So a barrel that it was just big enough for a human being to fit in, but he couldn't stand up. And so they put him inside of a barrel and left him in there for an extended period of time, and to the point that they said that he that almost died. And that after they released him, is that in his presence, someone said something bad about the ruler. And his response is that don't speak bad about anyone. The ruler that tortured him and punished him is that he didn't want anyone to speak bad about anyone in his presence. He forbade that person from saying something bad about the person who tortured him. And that they said to him that, but this ruler wrongly imprisoned you and tortured you. But look, and this is the people of Allah. And that I've heard my teachers mention this so many times, but this is one of the fundamental problems of the ummah of our Prophet ﷺ, is that we've forgotten this. كَمَا تَكُونُوا يُوَلَّ عَلَيْكُمْ. As you are, so will your rulers be. We've forgotten this. The ummah of the Prophet ﷺ that remains introspective. They look at their own selves. What did he say? He said, I was the cause of my own imprisonment. And in one narration, he said, it was because of a sin that I committed that this happened to me. That's how he saw it. And what was that sin? This sin was not like a sin the way that we think of it. He says is that he had a servant that one time that brought him some water, and that he forgot to remind her to pray on time. So she postponed the prayer out of the time. And he said that if I would have reminded her to pray, she would have prayed. And so because of that sin, that he viewed that as a sin in his right, because of that sin, is that Allah made this happen to me. He viewed his torture and imprisonment as something his own hands had wrought. But this is how the people of Allah are. This is how they are. They never blame other people. Whenever they go through tribulation, they blame their own self. And now, we all might be thinking in our minds now, okay, does that mean that, okay, this is happening to me, and it's all because of something that I've done? There's a lot of details there that you have to walk through and not to confuse people, but in general, yes. In general, yes. Is that the greatest source of calamities is sin. And that hasanat al-abrar, sayyat al-muqarrabin. The good deeds of the righteous are the bad deeds of those who are close to Allah Ta'ala. And to the degree of our closeness to Allah is the degree to which is that we will be taken to account for certain things. And that the closer that we get to Allah, the finer the relationship gets. And then the more aware of it we become. But for him, it's like he knew exactly what it was. This is what it was. And so he embraced that and saw it as a kafara, as an atonement for what it is that he did. And he's taken it now here in the dunya and khalas. And he's not going to be taken to account for it in the next world. And so he had great students as well. That many of the great Imams of Tareem were his students. Habib Hamid bin Umar bin Hamid, Habib Saqaf bin Muhammad al-Saqaf, the grandfather down the line of Habib Abd al-Saqaf, and the famous Habib Al-Rahman bin Mustafa al-Adrus, Madfun Annak, في القاهرة, يعني near Sayyidatina Zainab, يعني the Sahib al-Mu'allafat, and he was one of his students. And so he passed away in the year 1162 of the Hijrah, year 1749. And one final story about him. Is that one of the other reasons that they used to call him Allama to Dunya. And now this book here that I have here is the Kalam of Habib Abd. The stories get a little bit more esoteric, let's say. Is that he used to say, وَكَانِ يَقُولُ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ ثَلَاثِينَ عِلْمٍ مَا سُئِلْتُ عَنْهَا. There's 30 knowledges that I possessed that I was never once asked about. 30 different knowledges. And then he says, وَتَمُوتُ بِمَوْتِي. They're going to die with my death. And that they used to they said about him is that قَالُوا أَنْدُهُ مِمَّا يَنِيفْ عَلَى مِيَةٍ عِلْمٍ. Is that they said that he had close to 100 different types of knowledge. And that when he was getting close to passing, is that he called for that Imam Habib Saqaf bin Muhammad al-Saqaf, and that he said, come close to me and take from me this knowledge. Now keep in mind, there's that famous narration of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, that he used to point to his chest and he'd say, إِنَّ فِي هَذَا الصَّدْرِ لَعَلُومْ جَمَّةً. There is a copious amount of knowledge in this chest of mine. لَوْ وَجَدْتُ لَهَا حَمَلًا. Oh, were I to find people who would learn it. But literally hamala, to carry it. And this is the thing, is that when people want to learn, knowledge comes from the tongue, heart to the tongue, and people learn. And this is the thing, is that if someone's thirsty to learn, Allah will bring people from the other side of the earth for you to learn. If someone wants to learn, is that Allah Ta'ala will facilitate you a way to learn. But even if you think that it's far-fetched, even if you think that it's difficult. And when he was approaching his death, is that they said to him, is that should we bring you a tabib, should we bring you a doctor? And he had a very different perspective. And yes, you can bring a doctor, sure, that's from the means. I mean, these are people with Allah. They take the means. But he said that I'm always amazed at people who are sick, i.e. their hearts are sick. Not the wallahu tabib. And none of them are seeking doctors to cure the real diseases, which are the diseases of the heart. Right. And then he quoted the statement of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq that when he was close to passing, they said to him, is that shall we bring you a doctor? And he says, al-tabib alladhi amradani. Is that the doctor is the one who made me sick in the first place. Now that doesn't mean that we don't learn medicine, that al-ilmu al-Iman, ilm al-adyan, wa ilm al-abdan, knowledge is of two types, the knowledge of religion, the knowledge of that medicine. It's one of the most praiseworthy knowledges that we can learn, because our physical body is what we need to travel our path to Allah. But the awliya, the reason they're concerned about their physical health is different than the other people. The awliya are concerned about their physical health so that when they receive very powerful spiritual states, it doesn't affect their physical body and prevent them from worship. And the stronger your constitution, the stronger your physical body is, the more you'll be able to bear spiritual weight. And spiritual weight takes a toll on your physical body. And I've seen this firsthand, right before my eyes, literally. I've seen people, it was actually one of the descendants who did the tahqiq of another copy of this book. We were going to visit Zamba, and he always used to complain about his hip. And he'd seen multiple doctors, and none of them ever said anything was wrong with him. They couldn't find what was wrong with him. And when we went to go visit Zamba, everything was fine. He was walking normal. But then as you enter, you walk about 50 feet, and then you turn right. And as we turned right, which is where you actually start to go visit the awliya, he started limping. He was totally fine. He was totally fine. And then he starts limping. And we're getting closer to the grave of Sayyidina Faqih Muqaddam. He's like really limping. And we're about 15 feet away from the grave, and he's holding on to me, and he can't really walk. Like he's like hobbling. And then we visit, and then we start to leave, and eventually it just goes away. And it's I literally witnessed them, like, what happened? You can tell the people are not. People hear that like, oh, they're faking it. Oh, a'udhu billah. Right? These are people of Allah Jalla Jalaluh. Right? These are people who have never told a lie in their life. Right? They don't even know what lying is. Right? And that the spiritual weight is real. That Shaykh al-Rahman al-Saqaf used to say when his son Abu Bakr was young, they used to try to lift him. And someone would try to lift him, and he was 2-3 years old, and they couldn't lift him. But his spiritual weight was so heavy at age 2 or 3 that they couldn't even physically lift him. Right? And the only way that we could really bring that close, if people don't know how to understand this, right, Allah says, سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. We're going to cast upon you a heavy word. And we know that when the Prophet received revelation, he was on a camel. The camel kneeled. And there was times where the Prophet was on the lap of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, and that it was almost unbearable for him to hold when he was receiving revelation. So spiritual weight is very, very real. So I wasn't planning on going into that much detail, but inshallah ta'ala, we will start the actual book tomorrow, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But it is good to know the author who we're reciting from. And again, let's prepare our hearts and let's really benefit from this, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. That when you tune your hearts into these meanings and you love and respect and esteem these great imams, there's madad, there's deep and that very powerful spiritual sustenance that comes to you from them. And this word madad, if people don't know what that is, madad is to the spirit what food is to the body. And just as you eat food and you get energy, is that when you receive madad from the awliya, you get spiritual energy. And what does energy enable you to do? It enables you to do activities of all different sorts. The more spiritual energy that you have, it enables you to do too all types of different spiritual activities. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us and to benefit from this work and to attach our hearts to the affairs, the lofty affairs, inshallah ta'ala. And may we turn away from anything that is lowly. May Allah ta'ala bless us and that inshallah ta'ala bless us in this month of Ramadan. And we from the elect to expose ourselves to the nafahat in this month, Ya Arhamar Rahim. And as the time to break our fast gets near, may Allah ta'ala that forgive all of our sins, Ya Rabbil Alameen, and all of the meanings of itq min al-nar. May Allah ta'ala release us in all of the meanings from the fire, Ya Arhamar Rahim. May no one that we know and no one that we love and no one that's connected to us ever, Ya Rabbil Alameen, that enter into the fire or even come close to the fire. May we all have all of our past deeds forgiven and all of our past bad deeds changed into good deeds. And may we all have long lives in the obedience of Allah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadan wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Do we have copies of this? Mm-hmm. Can we pass to the sister side too? So this is, I've been meaning to get this out for a long time. This is the prayer, the concluding supplication of gatherings. So just pass a whole bunch up to them so they can, Muhammad, take it to the women. Take it. ربنا انفعنا بما علمتنا ربي علمنا الذي ينفعنا ربي فقهنا وفقه أهلنا وقربات لنا في ديننا ماهل الكثر انت وذكر ربي وفقنا ووفقهم لما تلتلي قول وفعل كرما وارزق الكل حلال دائما وخلتك يا علماء نحظى بالخير ونكفى كل الشر ربنا واصلح لنا كل الشؤون وأقر بالرضا منك العيون واقضي عنا ربنا كل الديون قبل أن تأتينا رسل نور واكفر واستر أنت أكرم من ستر وصلاة الله تغشى المصطفى من للحق دعانا والوفاء بكتاب فيه للناس الشفاء وعلى الآل الكرام الشرفاء وعلى الصحب مصابيح الغرور اللهم اهدنا بهداك واجعلنا ممن يسار في رضاك ولا تولينا وليا سواك ولا تجعلنا ممن خالف امرك واصاك وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم يا ربنا اعترفنا بأننا اقترفنا وأننا أسرفنا على لظى أشرفنا فتب علينا توبة تغسل كل حوبة واستر لنا العورات وآمن الروعات واغفر لوالدينا ربي ومولودينا والأهل والإخوان وسائر الخلان وكل ذي محبة أو جيرة أو صحبة والمسلمين أجمع آمين ربي اسمع فضلا وجودا منا بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول صلى وسلم ربي عليه عد الحب وآله وصحبه دارة الصحب والحمد لله في البدء والتناهي. Inshallah we're gonna next time we'll do some nasheed. We're gonna need murshids. I know people can keep that.